I'm sure you've heard plenty of jokes about what pastors' kids are like, and you've lived that experience. Tell us what it's like for you to remember growing up as a pastor's kid, both what you think were the good things and maybe the negative things growing up.
I have a lot better appreciation for it now than what I used to. I do look back, and there's some things that I didn't realize that I was being trained at that point, but I was learning nonetheless. But yeah, so some of that stuff you say jokes, there's some truth in that. Preachers' kids can be mean, but they're mean because they have to play with the members' kids. So, it all comes from somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Uh, my mom and dad, they did ministry right in front of me. I was always had a front seat to them doing ministry, hospital visits, home visits, prayer meetings, gospel sings, all that stuff, man. I mean, and some of that, like I said, I didn't appreciate at the time. I hated definitely hated going to gospel sings. Uh, I didn't necessarily like going to hospital visits, but I saw how my dad did that all those years. And so when I started having to do hospital visitation, it wasn't a big fear for me. And it was just kind of something I guess I just picked right up on. I'd seen him do it, so I knew that this is what you do. And I didn't realize, until I started having staff that work with me, and I'm telling them I need you to make a hospital visit, and they're like, "What does that look like?" I'm like, "What do you mean? What does it look like? You just go visit people in the hospital and you have prayer with them." And they're like, "I don't have a context for that. I have never seen that." And so that was a little bit an eye opener for me. That something I just took for granted they had never seen. And so I had to take a little bit of time and show them, hey, this is what this looks like. This is what you can do. It doesn't mean that you have to just, stay there all day long. Sometimes situations take longer than others, and so some things I take for granted that I've seen, not doesn't come that easy to everyone else, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, what were some of the things that were difficult for you being in a pastor's home? And maybe not from your parents, but just what you witnessed, what you saw, that kind of thing.
I think just a misconception that people would have when people would ask what my dad did, and so my dad is a pastor in the Church of God, Pentecostal pastor. People that had Catholic backgrounds, like, so your dad's a priest? And I'm like, yeah, kind of like that, but not really, you know. Then you'd have people who would hear he's a Pentecostal pastor, and so it's like, you guys handle snakes and all these misconceptions about what that's like. And I'm like, no, that's not us. And um, so those were kind of the weird things that you'd have to deal with. And so I didn't really go around waving that banner. Hey, my dad's a pastor. Um, it was a little bit embarrassing at times because I just didn't want to have that spotlight. I didn't want to have those questions. Um, I wasn't, in that point, I wasn't trying to win people to Jesus. I'm just trying to be, I just don't want to be ostracized. I don't want to stand out. And those were the kind of things that would make you stand out. So I wanted to become a wallflower and just blend in. Now I have a greater appreciation for that. And I'm so glad that I've had that experience. I've tried to be more mindful of that with my sons, knowing that, they can be people can look at them different, depending on how they see me, and I just want to be mindful of that. So,
So I know it's been over 30 years ago, but I had kind of a front row seat. Remember a day when you weren't really clear about believing that you were going into ministry with your future. And I remember when that changed. When you went to your dad and said, "Hey, I feel like God's got a calling on my life," what do you remember about his response, what he said or did during that phase for you?
um, it- it's very personal,
Yeah.
because I appreciate my dad. He never pushed me.
Mhm.
Um, it was I appreciate the chance to kind of come into it on my own. And I know now that I have my own two boys, I can't call them, right?
Yeah.
I That's got to be something that God lays on their heart. I can only try to, help foster whatever God's doing in them, and that's what I want. I want them to discover how God has equipped them and created them. And I think that's what my dad wanted for me was he saw things in my life, and so he wanted me to just let that flourish, but he couldn't force it.
Mhm.
So I appreciate the time and the space that he gave me. And so when I jump into that, right, obviously he's okay, here we go. This is what it's going to look like. And it was amazing from that point. Very scary making that decision because I had ideas of I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be wealthy. I wanted to have all these things that the world, all the trappings that you think comes along with that. And so putting all my eggs in God's basket in that sense was kind of scary for me because, my, my parents weren't wealthy, but they never lacked for anything. That we always had, what we needed. And so that was kind of one of those big trust moments of like God's like, hey, are you going to trust me? Are you going to trust me with your future, whatever future that is, if it's good or bad? Are you going to trust me with that? And so I remember that moment of saying, yeah, I'll trust you with my future. And it was kind of just that process of how did that play out? Seeing my parents, how they encouraged that process in me. Um, Specifically my dad, just, never always leading and guiding, never pushing in any sense.
Mhm. That's interesting because that was a question I was going to ask you later. There are a lot of people that kind of take the approach with other people in their life that they could be influencing or even their own children to just step back and let them become whoever they might be intrinsically. I don't really think that's necessarily scriptural because, we have influence and we have lessons to pass on, but you also don't want to push your kids. Now, you've got two boys and they're growing fast. And um, where have you found that balance with them?
Yeah, that's been difficult because I see, one, he's studying to be an engineer. And man, I see that that's his gifting, that's his talent, and I bless him to do that. The other, I think he does have a calling, but I can't, that's something I'm just trying to do exactly what my dad did, just stay close enough to encourage it, throw some gasoline on the fire when I see that opportunity. Um, but yeah, he's got to kind of come into that on his own in a sense. I have trained him. I have pointed him in that direction. I have always told my boys, you first thing me and your mom want for you is you become what God wants you to be, not what I want you to be, what God wants you to be. And so that has been something they've heard since they were little kids. That's something they hear now. They've heard me talk about that personally. They've heard me talk about that from the pulpit. And so that message has been consistent. And so I'm just trying to be consistent now with that. Hey, what does God want you to be? What's God putting on your heart? And so one of my sons, he's kind of, I don't know, what does this look like? He's in a very exploratory phase of his life, which is a little bit scary for me and his mom because, there's things that we want for him. There's things that we think we know that God is putting on his life and maybe calling him into, but he's got to answer. I can't answer that for him. She can't answer that for him. He's got to answer that for himself.
Mhm. So now that you are, I guess, seasoned in ministry, what
That's
what
a
things
funny way of saying I'm old.
now you've had some experience now.
Yeah,
You're not
yeah,
a newbie for
yeah.
any reason, but um, are there things that pop up in your memory or your mind as you're doing them or going through them that are some of the biggest lessons or reminders of your dad's legacy and ministry that you've been a part of and seen in your life?
Yeah, I think loyalty, for one, with just people that you work with, people that you do ministry with. My dad was very loyal. He had friends Um, and he was very willing to even have, disagreements with people and not let that ruin an entire relationship.
Mhm.
Um, and I love that about him. And I've heard that from other people that, my dad was just that way. He loved people and he allowed people to have those bad moments sometimes, and that didn't cut off the relationship. It was an opportunity for grace to kind
Mhm.
of be poured in, and maybe it's an opportunity for us to learn and try to understand better. So that I want to be that way, and I think that's one thing that I've tried to pick up is to just be loyal to the people who are on my team. Um, People who are doing ministry with me, I appreciate them. They don't have to be here. Some of these people that work with me, they're so talented, and they could be doing 100 other things, making much more money, and they have chosen to be here to work alongside of us in the ministry. And so I appreciate that, and I want to be loyal to
Mhm.
them and have their back in just anything that comes up. Um, but that consistency, I think there's always this push in ministry for to do great things and big things and growth and numbers and all that kind of stuff. And at the end of the day, you have to come back and be the same person. If you have this great big event, that's great and that's wonderful. But at the end of the day, you have to come back and you have to be a person of integrity, and you have to be a person that trusts God, and a person that people can trust. And, those are all the things that, lead up to those great moments. And they got to be there on the other side of that great moment. And sometimes they've also got to be there on the other side of that great failure. You got to come back and be the person that you need to be, those daily things, daily habits, daily processes, that we know we need to live out.
So there is God's big story that he's doing throughout the world and throughout his kingdom. And our individual lives are just a little small part of the big story. But then there's a bigger story than us that may not be the ultimate story, the big story where we see what God's doing more in a bigger perspective. Now, your father was a minister. You've got other family members that are ministers. You don't know what's coming behind you that may be connected to you, whether it was, hey, they were in my church or they were on my staff or it's my own kids or my grandkids, whatever. In my case, my grandfather was a pastor. My father was not, but I still feel that lineage. When you think about your life and your ministry being a part of something bigger that way that's still connected to you, what does that mean to you? And does that alter anything about the way you approach ministry or your life in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I think it goes back to the whole loyalty thing. Loyalty and legacy, they go together, because it's even when somebody has left my staff, I still want to have a good relationship with them, and I want their ministry to do well. And I think that's one thing I saw from my dad. Anytime that someone worked on staff with him, he wanted them always to have that chance to better themselves wherever they went. If they left his staff and went on staff with somebody else, or they went to go pastor and they're developing their own staff, he was always cheering them on. And that's what I felt as his son. He always cheered me on, but I could see him doing that with everybody else. So I want to be that guy that is cheering on people who have worked with me in the past, and now they're maybe at other churches, on staff, or maybe they've gone into the marketplace, and they've got these amazing positions and opportunities, and I want them to do well, and I want to cheer them on, because that's a win for me. That means, that maybe my life in some small way has encouraged them. And anytime that someone's come back and just said, "Hey, look, and this is what I've done. This is what we've had the opportunity to do," that's awesome. I don't want to have that. I think that competitiveness is sometimes is, people say, well, you need to have that competitive edge, that's not me, man. I want to celebrate what's happening. I want people to celebrate me, so I want to be able to celebrate somebody else.
Mhm.
And if I can do that, and just honor the time that they were with us, and now honor what God's doing in their life still. That's that's the best case scenario.
When all is said and done, what do you hope that people remember about the way that you lived and about the way that you handled this ministry that God gave you?
I hope they just think I was faithful. Um, Not perfect. Man, I'm not. It's not perfection that I'm striving for. I want to be faithful. Really, and that's kind of goes back to what I said a while ago. At the end of the day, whether you have this great event, or whether you have this big success, you know, when you walk in on Monday morning and all that was yesterday, I want there to be faithfulness, right? I want people to see that, and I hope people remember that. Um, I think that's what my dad showed me, that he was just faithful with whatever God gave him, whatever opportunity God gave him, whatever talent or skill God gave him. He was faithful with that. So I want to be faithful with that. I think that is success, right? Not what numbers you get, but what did you do with what God gave you? Was I faithful with it? Did I trust Him with it? Did I do well and allow Him to use what He put in my hand? All right. So
Yeah.
yeah.